All right. What is, or do you know what institutional racism is?
No, not exactly. I'm not too sure on that.
All right. So maybe another question that's good to ask is, have you negatively been affected by racism on Clemson's campus on this institute?
Me personally, I haven't, but I have fellow colleagues and friends that have been.
How did they react to that situation?
How they reacted, they kind of came back to our community specifically and let everybody know what was happening. So as you've seen, like some of the protests happened, and police reports were filed as well.
Yep.
To help keep everything intact.
Yeah, that's right. And do you think that being affected by racism can affect somebody's academic achievement?
If they let it get to their focus, I think it could affect if they're focused on what the next thing can happen versus their studies and getting ready for what they have to get ready for.
I agree. Thank you very much. All right. What is institutional racism?
Institutional racism is when a societal group oppresses a race based on ethnic or their skin color.
All right, Dr. Armando, what is institutional racism?
Institutional racism, I have 5 points. Where institutions have carried out or failed to carry out, P, the purpose of mankind. They're carrying out the purpose of the institution. R, respect for mankind.
Yes, sir.
They're carrying out the respect of the institution rather than the respect of man. I, integrity, carrying out the institution objectives rather than the truth and honesty of man. D, determination, carrying out the institution's thought process as relates to determination and discipline. E, enthus, a spirit of God. They've disregarded that plight and the journey of man in carrying out the plight and journey of the institution. That's institutional racism as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Armando.
Yes, sir. And by the way, that's based on my PhD research.
The Operation Common Sense with Pride.
Yes, ma'am.
There we go. And as far as you're concerned, from your own experiences, is there any way that you have personally been harmed by institutional racism?
Yes, I have. At this institution, Clemson University, I was probably the first person since Harvard Gantt integrated the school to have 5 college degrees. Almost promoted to the rank of full professor from Rutgers University, one of the top schools in the country, and yet Clemson and the institution failed to promote me. I had to go through bankruptcy court. I faced an all-white jury and was denied the rank of full professor. But through God's intervention, God's institution, I did get the rank of professor. I had to go through bankruptcy to get that. And this is 5 college degrees where there were men and women on this campus, and even here today, that only have 2 degrees. And they got the rank of full professor. That's institutional racism.
All right, Lane, what is institutional racism?
I'm not really sure what the exact definition of institutional racism is, but I do know that in my lifespan development class, we just learned that, like, for example, IQ tests are more directed towards helping white males or, like, having questions that white males will better know the answers to.
Exactly. And can you think of any examples from your own high school experience where the system tended to benefit, say, white people more than people of color?
I do know that in our honors classes, they were more predominantly white, and we got tested for those for honors, like before you get in middle school. So, like, if somebody doesn't have the socioeconomic status that they need, or their parents don't have everything that they can give them, then they're automatically, like, dropped out of the honor system.
All right, Camilo, what is institutional racism?
It is the policy of an institution to consider a group of people superior to everybody else.
That's exactly right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Dr. Bartley, what is institutional racism?
Those are built-in biases that groups or organizations or institutions have, whereby they make decisions based upon stereotypes or preconceived ideas as opposed to facts.
That is correct. That's just about spot on. And do you think that institutional racism makes it harder for people of color to succeed?
Absolutely, yes. Generally, if you do not get a chance to buy the ingredients, you don't get a chance to bake the cake. And so that's one person once put it. Because African Americans don't get a lot of say in picking people who work for them and opening up opportunities for others. They don't get an opportunity to advance or to hire or do other things that are necessary.
That is correct. I completely agree. And have you seen institutional racism here on Clemson's campus?
Every day. Yes, I have.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Bartley. All right, Courtney, do you know what institutional racism is?
Kind of, but could you tell me more?
Okay, so institutional racism is a pattern of like social institutions that gives negative treatment to a group of people based on their race.
Okay.
So, based off of that definition, have you seen institutional racism here on Clemson's campus?
No, I have not seen institutional racism at campus. Okay, so while I've not seen institutional racism on campus, I have seen a tendency for people of the same race to be more likely to join group projects together, whereas of people of different color and different race not to work with one another in my classes.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. What is institutional racism?
Dude, Rye Guy was just showing me this video in the car of this dude.
About institutional
Yeah,
racism?
Yeah.
So do you know what it is?
I do not know.
Okay, thank you. What is institutional racism?
It's racism within institutes, schools, government.
Yep. Do you believe that institutional racism is a direct reflection of the society in which the institute is in?
Yes.
Yes? Have you ever seen any examples of institutional racism in your high school or here on Clemson's campus?
Yes.
All right, what is institutionalized racism?
Institutionalized racism. Well, I guess it could be defined as racism in an institute.
Okay, and do you agree with racism in an institute?
I do not at all. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, and in the restaurant that I worked at, everybody applies, for a cook job or a server job or to be a busser, and no one wants to be the dishwasher. No one wants to get stuck as a dishwasher. But for some reason, everyone that ends up being a dishwasher is Hispanic. It's funny how that works out. Everyone that's white is all out on the floor as a server or a busser. I don't like that.
All right, what is institutional racism?
I'm not really sure.
All right, thank you. All right, Krista, what is institutional racism?
Racial discrimination within an institution.
That's good. Can you see institutional racism on Clemson's campus?
I can in the Tillman.
Is that a good example of it? What's a good example?
The Tillman debate.
They're like the renaming of Tillman? Okay. Have you ever benefited being a white woman because of institutional racism?
I think I have benefited, but I'm not proud of it.
All right, Dr. Miller, what is institutional racism?
I think there are several kinds of definitions, and I think it boils down to perspective, certainly, right? I mean, there are textbook definitions that are, I guess you could say, quantified in a way that you could single out what experiences are or results and things of that nature. But I'll tell you from my perspective, because I'm a lawyer by trade as well, and when I think of institutional racism, I'm thinking of racism that is not just in fact, de jure, but it's also de facto. So you have various components that are in place that not only promote, racism to its core, but it also embraces it in a very real way. When we talk about the de jure piece, we're thinking that the legislative component, the law as it relates to discrimination and racism. But then when we talk about de facto, it's those pieces that are not even remotely associated, right? They're more culturally based. It
is a part of a structure. It's a part of the infrastructure, right? And it is pervasive.
Right.
So I kind of view it in that sense.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much for that. Is there any way that you have personally been victimized by institutional racism?
Yeah, I mean, it would be impossible for someone like me, and certainly my ethnicity, and being born and raised in the South.
Yes, sir.
Born in the 60s.
Of course.
And not experience those kinds of things on a very, very real level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And can you see it here on Clemson's campus?
You know, it's interesting too, because people ask me that question all the time. Do I think that there are institutional frameworks as it relates to racism and or discrimination? And I can honestly tell you, from my perspective, institutionally, as it relates to legal and or de facto pieces, and I work with a lot of different people on this campus. When we talk about the whole institutional component, it would stem from the highest and the upper echelon as it relates to the institution. And that there is a manifest purpose behind it. I don't see those things. I see things that are culturally based,
yeah.
right? And I see things that are a part of our history, right? That create this whole concept of racism, but from an institutional perspective, as being part of the, both either latent or patent kinds of racism pieces, as a part of the institutional structure, no.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Now, what you cannot do is control for all the variables, all of the many
Sure.
facets of an institution,
Yeah.
right? You can't control for individual behavior. Now, you can have mechanisms in place that effectively deal with those issues, which we do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have very good policies and procedures, and you have the law on your side as well. And then you have the teeth of the implementation pieces, right? So we are very, very good at that. We are very aggressive and very assertive in rooting out those pieces that are in fact racist or discriminatory.
Yeah.
On its face or even not on its face,
Yeah.
right? The other components, we can't control for outside influences, we can't control for the actions of individuals who may in fact harbor these feelings and these thoughts. And we're like, this university is like any other city, people will come here with certain ideas,
Yeah.
right? But those ideas are not embraced, nor are they encouraged as it relates to the institution.
That's right. I'm sure it's kind of difficult to maintain all of those policies, laws, and the professional side of it when you have so many different views,
right.
values,
and
coming in.
Things,
But
right, and we see those things all the time. But when you look at the core of the institution, right, and when we talk about an institutional component as facilitating, embracing, promoting racism, no.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And lastly, do you feel as if institutional racism makes it harder for people of color to succeed in this society?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. And it's unfortunate that there are vignettes all over the country where we see those things that are alive and well and real.
Yeah, very real.
And what we have to do, I think the biggest way, in my view, to combat some of these kinds of things, Hannah, is to have this shared level of consciousness as it relates to all of these things. When we look at, when we just break it down to its the very fundamental levels, and when we talk about racism, right, discrimination in any format is wrong.
Yeah.
Now, it's not only illegal, but it is unethical and it is immoral, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about thinking about these things from a higher plane of consciousness, right, we have great clarity. And I think that's a shared responsibility for all of us.
I agree.
And it comes in very, very, it comes out at us in so many different ways, right? Speaker, be a thought, you know, even people that are somewhat unaware, right? But then we get into the cultural competency pieces,
yeah.
and we have a duty to kind of look at things in that way, because this is a community here, right? And it is our goal, it's our desire, it's part of our mission, right? To think about community and everything. And people feeling comfortable, right?
Yeah.
All members of our community
Yeah,
need
and
to feel comfortable here.
in my education class, we've discussed about how, like schools, public schools, for example, just kind of reproduce
Right.
racism. So it's kind of difficult to see that happening, that reproduction of this idea and
Right.
thought. So these young kids start off very, very young, go throughout high school,
Sure.
and it from what I've seen, it affects the academic achievement
Right.
of a lot of students.
Right.
And it's sad. I think we should all come together like you.
Hannah, let me back up a little bit on this institutional racism piece. If you did not have mechanisms in place, right, as it relates to dealing with these fundamental issues, to even correct them when we see them, right? See, that's how I view it institutionally. If the institution is confronted with things, right, that they may or may not be aware of, right, they're quick to respond from a policy perspective, right, in moving in a way that we minimize all of these barriers and all of these things that we can't in fact control for. And that's why I say that when we talk about the institution and its commitment to these kinds of things, I don't believe that the institutional racism piece is a part of this culture.
Yeah, I agree. All right, thank you, Dr. Miller.
Yeah, that
My What is Institutional Racism project revealed a few things that I was not expecting and a few things that I was expecting. One thing that I was not expecting was the fact that more people did know what institutional racism was than those who did not know what institutional racism was. Out of the few that did not know exactly the definition of institutional racism, the majority of them were white students, whereas just a few students of color did not know the exact definition of institutional racism. And this may show that the reason that the white students were unsure of the topic is because that they have not experienced it as much as the students of color. This was one thing that I was expecting, because obviously being of a majority race, you will see the benefits more than the opposite. Let's see. Another thing that stood out to me was the fact that not very many people used the topic of institutional racism to vent their viewpoints. Instead, they tried to give more examples as to what institutional racism truly was and what exactly they had seen in their lifetime. As far as the pattern of viewpoints in regards to hometown, major, age, and race, I did not see any patterns of answers in regards to these questions. And as recent events in Clemson have shown that racism is a prominent issue and has been a topic of discussion for a while now, I'm proud that the students and faculty that I did interview took a more open-minded approach to the question. There was those who did use it as their outlet to not vent, but to discuss the issues that they have experienced on a more personal level, but the majority took the topic in a respectful and learning way, and I am proud to be a Clemson student, and this is one of the main things that was validated to me through this project, is how proud I am to be a Clemson student and to be a part of a Clemson family that is willing to at least talk about a situation instead of take it to a whole different level.